A very good afternoon to everyone present here. My name is Sarah Raha, and I'm a member of the Toolbox program at Enactus Thompson Rivers. I welcome everyone today at the Business Kickstart 101 event. Our Dean Speaker Series today features Geri Pryor, Chief Financial Officer of ICBC. Geri holds her Bachelor of Commerce Degree in Administration and Management Information Systems from the University of British Columbia. She has been named both CFO of the Year with Business in Vancouver and one of the top 100 women in Canada of 2012. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Geri Pryor.
Thank you. Thank you very much. All right. So thank you very much for having me here today. And I'm just going to ask someone who's really good with the computer to see if we can get that little box off there. Anyhow, I'm absolutely honored to be here today. This is hopefully going to be an interesting discussion. What I want to do today is talk to you a bit about my career, but also around some of the observations I've had along the way. And I've called this discussion personal leadership. And I'll get into that a little bit into the presentation. But I have very strong views about this. People that have heard me speak about it before, I'm very passionate about this. Because I think we all come through with different skill sets, different learnings when we go to university or when we enter the job force. And I think there's things you can be doing today and practicing today that will make you a very strong leader in the future. And it isn't waiting until you get that management or senior level job. It's about how you are behaving today. And so I do want to spend some time talking about that. All right. So the agenda for today is really around a bit of an introduction on personal leadership. It's about planning your career, some of my experiences and observations, as I've said. Personal leadership will spend some time. I actually have some work for you to do, so be prepared. And it's about knowing yourself. So personal leadership, it's not about position power. Like I said, it can be at any level, and it should be at any level that you're thinking about personal leadership. It's about how you show up every day. It's how you show up with your friends, your colleagues, your family. I mean, I don't think all of us really think about it every day because you just go through life and you get busy. But what I'm going to try and do today is get you to give some thought to that because I think it's really important. It's a lot more about your behaviors than what you say. They need to align. And so a lot of people think good leadership is about being able to get up there and give a really empowering speech or to motivate people. Well, that is part of leadership. But personal leadership is a lot more about, does that resonate and are you genuine? And that type of feeling that people have about you starts from today. You already have people have impressions of you, whether you've just met them or whether you're a work colleague. And so it's things that you can be more deliberate about. And I think a lot of people in the workforce, even senior leaders, sometimes forget that part of it. So it can be a big differentiator when those opportunities come up, or you may not be eligible for them. And it might be more about not your talent, your smarts, your ability even to be a strategist. It might be about how you've been perceived along the way. So I want to talk about planning your career. I noticed there's some business folks in here, some colleagues in the audience, but this really is about, as you're coming out and thinking about your career, how much planning do you need? Well, I'll tell you, I actually didn't plan my career. I'm not saying that's the right way to do it. It's just that I certainly didn't think about, I want to work for an insurance company. I don't think anybody in the insurance business came out and said, my ambition is I want to be in an insurance company. I kind of fell into it, and I'm going to talk about how that happened. Now, the level of planning you do is based on your comfort level. There's no right or wrong. Some people are more deliberate about how they want to plan things out. My caution to you is I also have some friends and colleagues that really did map out their career and this number of steps, and this is where I want to be by age X. And by the way, that's how much accumulated wealth I'd like to have along the way too. I think when you do that, there's nothing wrong with having goals. I encourage you to have goals, aspirations, have something you're shooting for. What I want to caution you on is if you do it too narrowly and you stick to that path, you may reach the end goal, but you may miss some really wonderful opportunities along the way, and you might be narrowing what could really enrich you as a person and as a potential leader. So that's what I'd say about planning. I think it's an individual thing for sure. But don't get panicked if you don't have your life planned out. I think it's okay. You can go along the way. You can take different turns. You can take different avenues, and that's all okay too. So my experiences are really, this is my career history, and this is what I'm going to talk about and hopefully share with you, as I said, some of the observations. So I am a chartered accountant, and now all of the accountants are CPAs in Canada, so that aligns a lot more internationally. I was with, at the time, one of the large 8 firms. Today, there's 4 large firms. There's been a lot of amalgamation. So I had a client called the Insurance Corporation of BC. You would know it as ICBC. And that's where I jumped in. Somebody in the organization actually said to me, why don't you apply for this job in internal audit? And so I did apply for it, and that's where I started my career at ICBC. So the rest of these positions are at ICBC. I've been there 27 years. I planned to be there 2 to 3 years. I did not want to be labeled as a government worker, crown organization, because I had come from an era where it was, you want to be in private industry, you want to be entrepreneurial, you want to have the innovation part of it. But when I got inside the organization, there was such an interesting path for me, and I'll explain that actually at every point when I kind of did that check, is this the point to leave, is this the point to look out elsewhere? I just had different opportunities coming at me all the time. It is a benefit of being in a large organization, and a large organization that goes through change. So for me, it's worked well. You might think never, and that's fine too. You can move around, and all of this is open to you, open to anybody at any stage. But I did a stint in internal audit, I did a stint in claims, I set up some project management discipline at the organization. I ran something called the 6-point plan, I'll talk about that. And then I landed in finance. So until this final job, which I've spent about half my career, so I've been in this job 13 years now, same job, I had never worked in finance before. So I went through and got my accounting, and then I didn't really have anything else to do with finance from that point on. And I worked in an accounting firm for about 3.5 years. So I didn't really do that from there on, and then I moved into finance at this stage of my career. And right now I'm doing off and on some board work, and really I find that's a way of giving back as well. So it's just a different element, a different way you can contribute. So you might think, which industry should I choose? And we talked about, I didn't choose insurance. I kind of fell into it. And I would say any industry can be interesting. Now, if you happen to have a real passion for something, like let's say you have a passion for automobiles or technology, well then by all means, look for that industry and find a job in there and see where it can take you, right? On the other hand, if you have a passion for something like social responsibility or environment, watch which industries you go into. Watch the company and see how they apply that, because that could be a real rub if they're not aligned to your values. So in those instances, I think, yes, be industry specific or be company specific. Research it well. But if you don't really have any of those, and I was one of those, didn't really have a true passion about any specific industry or something where I wanted to go, I think there's many industries that can be fascinating. Things you don't even know about, that you wouldn't even hear about. And it's that openness to those opportunities that I think can open some doors. So again, which industry? I'd say don't target. If you're coming out with a business degree, you're coming out with, if you're going to be a doctor, obviously that's very specific. But if you're coming with a business degree, there are so many businesses, so many industries that are open to you. And so go explore. And it's okay to change. Some people change every couple years. And I think we, as the old timers that maybe have stayed with the company for a long time, we see that. We see some of the younger folks come and go. And then after the recession, I've seen a few other people have a bit of a change of heart and saying, well, this organization's pretty good and it's interesting. I think I'm not going to run away and look for something new all the time. So I think it depends partly on economy, but partly on your personal interests. So let me start with the external auditor position. Why this is such a cool position is you get to see tons of businesses. So again, 3.5 years, I'm not listing them all. I'm giving you a smattering of the type of businesses I audited, which meant I got to look at the financials, I got inside the company, I met people at all different levels within that company, and I learned how the business ran. I learned how the financials work. I learned what drove the business, what drove the costs and the revenues. So it's a good way to get a very broad brush. You don't go deep. You don't go deep when you do auditing, but it gives you a broad brush of everything that's out there. And so I did things from mining, forestry, school boards, Expo 86, you're probably all too young for that. Expo 86, there's a Pacific National Exhibition, the fairs, government, I was in the Yukon for a while, newspaper chains, not-for-profits, pensions, legal firms, you name it, and then finally insurance. But there were many other businesses I also audited, because in that world, you're looking at audits of probably 2 to 3 weeks at different companies, and you're moving every 2 to 3 weeks onto a new client. So what else is that good for? It really hones your communication skills. It hones your ability to relate to people, because what you learn very early is you can't go in there with any ego or any attitude. The best way to go in there is you're very appreciative of everybody's help. Because as you need information from them, you don't know the company, you don't know where to get things. As you need information from them, people start leaning over backwards to help you if you treat them respectfully. And if you go in there thinking that you are better than anybody else, or you have any attitude issues, let me tell you, they can hold up your audit. And so it's a really cool way of working from people all different levels and treating everybody the same, right? And by the way, when you start in that world, at least in my day, everybody made more than you. Because you always had to audit the salary and the payroll. And you went, the janitor, everybody made more than us. But that's okay. It's a starting place to work. And I think the salaries today are a lot better. So the observation, first observation is, target an industry if you have a passion for it. Otherwise, be open to opportunities and where that can lead you. And don't target necessarily a specific job. You're not tied to one industry or company for life. You have the option. It's your choice. In a career progression, I've drawn this up because I think it portrays when you come out of university and you have a very high technical skill set, you also, on the entry-level positions in companies, have a narrower view of the company or of the business. And I think as you progress up in a company, your view has to broaden. I mean, it's one of the things that differentiates you. What I've seen in our organization, we hire in some young students that have just come out of, for example, the actuarial program. It's a very tough program, and they are like really, really smart. It's one of the toughest programs academically. And so when they come in, what I see them is they're very good technical, because we get top-level students. There aren't a lot of actuarial jobs in Vancouver, and so we can, and we have one of our vice presidents who actually teaches at SFU, where they have this program. So we pick really top students out of there. And they come in and they've gotten A's through their whole school, all 4 years, whatever, 5 years, whatever they're doing. They come in here, and at the technical job, they also excel. They're doing the spreadsheets, they're working some of the analysis, they're doing the problem solving, and we give them lots of praise. They're excellent. And then we're looking for who out of them can go into management. And this is where I've seen the real transition shock happen, that often the people that are most technically astute are not the best managers, okay? And some of those that were not the top technicians actually make very good managers. Now, what all companies do, I've seen it in many businesses, is they often do promote their top technical person because they're the star on the team, and so they must be the manager. But the manager position is really different. And so again, I encourage you to think about it as you're entering the workforce or you're starting to go into these roles. The technical takes you so far. If you haven't honed your other skills around how you deal with people, how you treat people, how you interact and communicate with people in an effective way, how to make sure you're not offensive when you're giving feedback, how do you deliver tough messages in a tactful way. If you can't do those things, your management skills are lacking. So I've seen these really good, smart people move into these roles and struggle. And it's, that's partly our fault in management of how we're coaching and developing these people, but not everybody has a natural aptitude. So I'm saying practice these things now. I have, Ted knows this, we talk about our kids a lot when we get together, but I have now, my kids are 22 and 23. And when they were in their teenage years, the thing that used to bother me is there was actually, I thought, cruel comments being made amongst these kids and amongst their peer group. And it was called honesty. And I said, that's a bunch of crap. Like, sorry, hope this is being recorded. That's not polite. So, for me, it's around, yeah, you can be honest, absolutely be honest. But you know what? You don't have to be hurtful when you do that. And so part of what I'm looking for, when I'm looking for people for management potential, I'm looking for people that are a little more sophisticated than that don't play that card. I'm looking for people that are actually treating people with respect, because that's where you need the management leadership to be. You want them to be the examples to the rest of the people. So that's a consideration. As you broaden your view, if you have a desire, you get into the more strategic world, and that's where the senior executive and leadership positions are. And that's around where you're creating the vision for where that company's going to go, how you're going to better service your customers, et cetera. And that's the role that, I find it fascinating, but it's not for everybody. And that's okay. Anywhere along the spectrum is okay. Just understand what makes you successful along the way. And it's not the same skill set that you start with. You have to start working at these other aspects of it. So I also then went into internal audit. So this is kind of an interesting position because when I joined ICBC, the position that opened up was an internal audit. Now that's different than external audit. This is a part of the organization where you have employees that look at different areas of the business, but what was neat is you go deep. So you go across the company much more deeply than you do at an external audit view. So as opposed to 2 to 3 weeks in a company, you might do an audit that might you 2 to 3 weeks in one department. And what you learn there is you actually learn how the business runs because you're going and you're visiting and you're making contacts across the organization. So what do you learn in that? You learn how the business operates, what the important things are there. You learn about who of your contacts you can rely on and who will be supporters. You learn who are the influencers in a company, which is always useful to know. You know who always does the right thing. You learn a lot about the people in the company. So if you're alert, if you're open to it, it's somewhere where you can really gain a lot of knowledge about the area you work in. You also have to develop sound judgment though. So when you go in an audit, it's really not cool to go in and have this attitude of, I'm going to find something, and then kind of it's, I gotcha. Like that is just not, that doesn't go over well. What you want to do is you want to be helpful to the business area. You want to help them understand what a good control environment is, and you want to balance risk with that. Because you can control an environment so well, but it's really, really costly to do that, and that's not in the best interest of the organization. On the other hand, you can lighten that up a lot and take a lot of risk, and that's a lot cheaper, but that can lead to other consequences. So your judgment gets honed in that type of job. And so you do learn to deliver the negative messages well, if you're a good auditor. You do learn to influence without power. So why is that important? So some people, as they progress in their career, it's very easy to say, I can get this done, I can do this, but what they do is they pull on position power to get it done. So they're either more senior, or they escalate things quickly, and they get their boss to step in, and all of a sudden you got a senior person saying, well, I'm very concerned about that, I think it needs to be done this way. And that's called pulling on position power. I really have an issue with people that do that a lot, because to me it's an indication their skill set isn't as good as it needs to be for them to do the job. If you build up effective relationships, if you are trusted in the workplace, I think it's way less about position power. It's way less about people believing in what you say because you have been genuine, you have been forthright, you have been just who you are every single day. And when people view you that way, they're often quite willing to work with you. They're often willing to listen to your point of view. If you're one that goes around and just pulls position power, people will start to avoid you. Nobody likes to be treated that way. So one of the things in internal audit that you do, and this will happen often in support roles, if you're in an HR role, if you're in an IT role, if you're not in the mainstream of the business, and by the business I mean the sales, the production, maybe it's the servicing end of the business. I call those kind of where the customer touch points are. They often in an organization have more influence in certain ways because they're dealing with the customer. We have to get the things with the customer right. If you're in a finance role, for example, you're supporting those people, okay? And when you're supporting those people, you have less influence. I can't go in there and run the claims division, right? I can't go in there and run the sales area of ICBC, but I can influence from the outside. So an influencing ability and somewhat negotiation are really, really important skills to develop along the way. And I think internal audit was a perfect example of how to do that. Now, I learned a really good lesson in internal audit. And I want you to think about this if you are one of the students in the room. And I was asked by my first boss, so you've just joined ICBC, where do you want to be? So map out your career plan for me. I said, oh yeah, and so I said, yes, I think this is what it would look like. I'd like to be in internal audit. I'd actually like to probably get your job, I told my manager, and maybe do that for 5 years. And so I would be a first-line manager in internal audit for 5 years. Then I kind of moved to a more senior manager in internal audit for 5 years. Or I said I could do a finance role, a senior level for 5 years. And then I think I'd like to move to what was kind of the next tier. I do that for 5 years. And then I would like to kind of get into the executive level. So it was about, 4 steps, 3 or 4 steps. And he said, and so 5 years each. And he goes, so you're 26. And so he says, by the time you're about 40, you want to be like an executive. And I said, that sounds good. And he said, and then you're going to do what? Like at this point, a lot of people still work till 60, 65. So you're going to do that for 20 years? Like, do you want to be the CEO? And I said, no, I wasn't really thinking of that. I think I'd be good there. And he said, I want you to consider not taking a direct path up like this. I want you to consider this. I want you to consider lateral moves. He said, you have lots of time. So I joined the organization. I was 26 years old. I was a manager at 26. And he said, you need to look at lateral moves because you can do that route up. You might even get that route up. You might even be successful. Don't know. He said, but the problem is you'll be quite narrow in your view because you'll be seeing everything through this. If you move around the organization, whether you stay at ICBC or move to another organization, you will enrich your knowledge, your skill sets. You'll have much better understanding of things if you move around. So he said, I want you to consider lateral moves. And it was one of the best pieces of advice I ever got. And I'll talk about that and why I did some of the moves I did. Because I think it did make me a better executive. By the way, I did end up being executive at age 40. But I had done some lateral moves. And actually, my plan wasn't to take I wanted to do one more stint before I was ready, I thought, ready for the executive role. But sometimes when an opportunity comes to you, you jump, right? And it was a hard one to resist. So observation number 2, don't rush to get to the top in a single stream, if that's what you're thinking of. If it's business and it's finance or accounting all the way up, be deliberate and open about taking that. Search them out. They're really, really well worth it. And it also gives you, I think, an edge over someone that's done this. Not to say that they're not good when they get that level, but their views and their perspectives are going to be different than someone that's moved around the organization. I think it makes you a stronger contributor, sharpens your business acumen overall. So, observation number 3, learn how to use influencing power without position power. And a lot of that has to do with listening to what the others are saying. So when you get resistance to something, it's really, if you feel strongly about something, it's pretty normal to kind of go there and try and convince someone of your arguments, right? Because you have a compelling argument, you have a compelling case. And when someone puts up resistance, if you don't address that resistance, you're very seldom going to get them to change their opinion. Not just by speaking louder, not just by speaking more. You need to address that. So listening is a really, really important key aspect of being able to influence. Because until you can address the issue that the person has raised, they don't move forward. So the other thing is compromise. If you're trying to get something in life, there are compromises all the time. And it's not about, in business, to me, getting all the way there. Sometimes you do it in 2 steps or 3. You still have the end goal in mind, you know where you need to get to, but sometimes it's easier for an organization or for someone you're working with to do that in some steps. And so be strategic about it. Don't make it a win or lose. Take it if you can do it in some steps. Still get to the end place, might take a little bit longer, but that might be a better way to go. All right, my next stint was, I actually went into claims. So this was a big stretch for me because I was not claims born and bred. Okay, I didn't come up through that route. So in audit, where I was able to be a manager, if anybody got into trouble or a project needed help, I could step in and I could actually do it. I knew how to do audit. I knew how to train people. I knew how to do the work. This one was different. In this position, I couldn't do any of the jobs. As a matter of fact, if issues came to me, I wasn't even necessarily sure how to resolve them. So I did apply for this job in that lateral type move, but what I found was, holy smokes, I'm really hoping nobody takes a sick day because I couldn't help if somebody phoned. So here's what you learn in this type of job. You learn delegation, you learn to trust the people, you know, so it's always, I go into jobs, I trust until someone proves to me they can't be trusted, right? I think that's a really good way to go into a work environment because what it does is you're supporting the people that work with you. So I had these responsibilities and it was interesting. It was a job where as I started to get more comfortable with it, and you do, you get comfortable, you kind of pick up on what's going on. You realize you don't have to be the technical expert in this stuff at all. There are way smarter people all around you, which is good. And it was this job that I actually got to work with the senior team in claims. And I was the first woman amongst, I think there had to be 10 to 12 men. And they were all kind of in their 50s, late 40s, 50s. And I was there probably in my 30s. So this was a really interesting mix for me, and I was an interesting mix for them. There were some pauses in the conversation, because in those days things were not quite as, I'll say, politically correct in all meetings as they are today. I did also, I think, contribute greatly to their health. They used to order donuts in for all the meetings, and I changed it up to dry bagels and yogurt. So I actually had wives that actually called me and thanked me. So, I mean, you know, you influence where you can. And so I had their best interests at heart. So I had a bit of fun with it. But it was a very interesting job. And like I said, I didn't know how to do any of the work, but I was expected to lead that group. And we did some really amazing things. You work as a team. You learn. They put ideas forth. They know this stuff. So you work as a team. You develop vision. You decide what needs to be fixed, what needs to move forward. And it was a really, really rewarding experience. Really rewarding experience. So, oh, I did it again. Sorry. Can someone push the wrong button? Sorry. I'm sorry. Oh, I'm doing it. I'm putting it. Okay. Here we go. I've got it. All right, the next job that I did was I got tapped on the shoulder. Now, here's how not to do something, okay? This is like, I really did not behave well in this situation. So I got tapped on the shoulder. The organization was going through some really financial struggles, and they brought KPMG to do a lot of work around where all our cost pressures were, et cetera. And we had also been having rate increases for a number of years that actually averaged quite high. I'll say 6 to 9%. If you looked at in between elections. Now that meant some years were 0, some years were double digit, but it's 6 to 9% ongoing. So that was a problem, and government said, you know, this can't continue, and our claims costs were starting to rise, and claims costs are what drive, in the insurance business on auto is what drives it. And so they said, we need to do something different. And they actually put in a rate freeze, and they said, we're going to look at things like an optional product, which for ICBC is, right now, it's people can sue each other in the product that we have. We're the last standing jurisdiction where that can happen. But they actually want to look at other options because there are options you can do that take costs out of the system. And so we started to gear up for things like that. But I got tapped on the shoulder and said, we think we want you to head up and start a bunch of these projects and work with us on these product options. And I'm going like, oh, I don't think I'm really going to be very good at that. So I had a different vice president of the company come up to me. And again, this is not how to do this, by the way. And they tell me it's a female thing. They said guys wouldn't do that. They said guys would say, sure, and then go figure it out later. I don't know if that's true or not, but I said, you know what? And so I said, I started to list off people that I thought could do it better. And they said, no, actually, we want you to do this. And so I went back and I said, well, I need to think about this. And I went back home that night and I went to my husband and I said, I don't know why, but they're picking on me and they're setting me up to fail. Like, I just don't think I should do this. And he's going, well, they must have some confidence. They must see something in you that you can do it. Are you sure? And I'm saying, I don't think so. So I thought about it, and I came up with another name of who could do it. So I went back to the vice president again the next day, and I said, I thought of somebody else. And he says, no, I know, that's an interesting thought, but no, we want you to do this. So I went back to my boss. So I finally went back to my own boss, and I said, you know, this other vice president's come to me, and I am really worried about this, because I don't know what I did to deserve this. But I think it's really unfair that I'm getting put in this position when I don't want to do this. So you can see how this is not a good way to approach an opportunity, right? So he looked at me and he goes, okay, Geri, here's the, and he was a wonderful gentleman. His name is Neil Weatherston. And he said, Geri, here's the deal. He goes, number one, you can do this. Number two, I'm not going to let you fail. So what you need to do is go figure out what you need to do to be successful. And then take that to this other vice president. And then he said, see ya. So I thought, huh. And it was a mindset shift, right? Well, the shift was really from panic to, okay, how would I go about this? So those 3 people I had listed that I thought could do the job better than me, I sought them out. I set up meetings. I said, I'm being put in this position and I need some help. And I may need help more than today. And so can you tell me how you would go about approaching this? And by those 3 different interviews, I'd put together a plan. And I went back in to that vice president. I said, all right, I'm willing to take this on. And he goes, yep. And I said, and here's what I need. And with that, we moved forward. It was a really fascinating project. At the end of the day, the government decided, and there was political lobbying and everything else going on, and the trial lawyers were very vocal during this period. Of course, they did not want a product change where tort might be coming out of the system. But KPMG said there was an alternative that could be done. We had done some road safety. They said you could really ratchet up road safety and see if that does it. I mean, if it doesn't do it, you know, ICBC, government, you can always look at alternatives. But what about road safety? And that's really when we turned into, I call it our kind of our road safety company era. And it meant that we did just kind of a splash of a whole bunch of projects. So I flew out to Ontario. I looked at the graduate licensing program out there. And they had put in the L and the N, equivalent to our L and N. And so I kind of took a lot of notes and met a lot of people out there and brought that back. The provincial government had tried to put in, actually, a graduate licensing program a couple times, 2 or 3 times, and they had not put it all the way through. We had just merged with the motor vehicle branch, so the team that was given to me to be on this graduate licensing was a team that had tried this 2 or 3 times. So I met with them, and the conversation went like this. Well, if you really want us to do this one more time and waste everybody's money, we can do this, but it's not going to work. So I'm, again, thinking, oh, this is going well. And I said, well, actually, we are going to be successful. ICBC has a history of putting projects in and being successful, and we're going to find a different way to do it. We're going to learn from what happened before. We're going to do this differently. And I still have people sitting like, and when they all sit there with their arms crossed, it's a very good sign on body language. It's not going well. And so I went, okay. So I stepped back, and I thought, I'm going to change up the team. And that's what I did. I found a project manager externally who had a lot of experience. I told him the issue. I said, we're going in there, and we're going to assess the team. We're going to change it up. And we had a very, very severe talk with the team saying, we need to know now who's in, who's out. And if you don't feel you can fully commit 100% and believe in what you're doing, you need to raise your hand. There's somewhere else you can be, but it's not on this team. And we took out about, I'm going to say, 75% of the team. And that was needed because we needed a mindset of can-do. You can't work with a bunch of resistors on something like that. We put graduate licensing in 1998. We put in intersection safety cameras. That's where that came from. We enhanced the speeding, drinking, driving, enforcement. We worked with the police on that. The road improvement program expanded. Today we get about a 5-to-1 return on that stuff. I think it's pretty darn good. I mean, often the municipalities put in money, and we put in money, and jointly we do things around road improvements. Put in higher fines around excessive speed, construction zones, recovery management. We really worked on getting people well, because the faster people got well, the less the claims cost, right? Because now they're back at work and we're not paying for all of that. We put legislative changes. There was a suite of 40 of them. Not necessarily all the same size, but we got them in. And that was a really exciting, that was one of the best experiences I had in the organization. And thank goodness nobody listened to me at the beginning when I resisted it. So take on responsibilities and projects that'll stretch you. Don't be afraid of it. Do not do what I did. Go and put a plan together of what you need to be successful. Go get help and ask those people to support you along the way. Now, where does that work well? If through your whole career path, as you're touching these people, you've always treated them well. If you are respected in an organization and people are willing to help you, they step up and go overboard. If your behavior has not been so cool all along the way and now you need that help, do not expect to get the over-the-top help you might need. So these things pay off, and this is why I'm saying how you behave today will influence your success in the future. All right, so then I moved on, and at this point in my career, after I'd finished the project work, I wanted to do an operational role. And I encourage you to do an operational role. And what does that mean? It's really kind of the frontline stuff that touches customers, and I had pulled out a mentor, someone who was going to retire in a year. I'd actually approached him. I was being deliberate about a career move at this point, and I said, I want to basically shadow you, job shadow, for a while, and can you teach me the job? I had no idea if I was going to get the job. I was taking proactive moves on my part to get myself ready for that. Now, I was a month or two into it. I was starting to meet with people that he met within industry, starting to know the people, because I thought, I really want this job. So I was trying to up my chances of getting that job. At that same time, the CEO, the present CEO of the company, came in and with a consulting firm and said, I'm going to be doing some reorg work, so a lot of people in the organization are going to get interviewed. So I got interviewed, and actually the CEO interviewed me and said, what do you think your next career move is? So I said, well, funny you should say, I've already started to work on this. I'm working with this individual, I'm doing this. And he said, I actually think that's really good. You've been in a support role your whole career. I think an operational role would be great for you. So I'm thinking, oh, this is good. Now I've got the CEO's support on this too. This could maybe happen. And so the work went on, and then about a month later, he came back, and I had another interview. And he said, I'd like to offer you the CFO role. Okay, here's another thing. Know when to keep your mouth shut. I said, well, what was the point of the other conversation we had? I was talking about I want the operational role, which, of course, was not on the executive. And I said, I was gearing up for that. So, you know, sometimes, you know, your mouth goes a little bit too fast. And he said, Geri, I'm offering you the CFO role, and I think I need you in that position. He said, I need you to go home and think about it. And he said, but I know operational, I said it would be good for you, but this is what I need you to do. So I went home and I thought about it, and I thought, oh, what a stupid thing to say. Like, he's offering me a position on the executive. So of course I said yes, but again, I went back in, and at that time, the CFO in that position, in that role, I didn't think was playing a significant enough role in the business. I thought, and because I was in claims was dominating the business at that time, and the finance actually had a very minor role. And I thought, if I'm going to do the CFO role, that's not how I want it to operate. We are a financial institution. And so I thought that the CFO has to have a more prominent role, and there has to be changes in how things are done. So I went back to the president at the time, and I said, you know, I've thought about this, and I'm willing to take this role. I'm actually quite excited about it, because I thought, now I'm doing the selling job. I'm excited about this, and I was. I said, but here's how I would do that role. And I said, I would change this, I would change this. I would like to be positioned this way. These are the types of shifts I think this organization needs to make. A lot more financially driven. We have to be more financially, our acumen in the whole organization has to come up. So I've pointed all these things out. And he was a pretty laid back guy, and he goes, okay. So I said, so I need to know that you're going to support me in this. And he said, he didn't say he'd support me. He said, I won't get in your way. And actually, that was the type of guy he was. It wasn't that I actually had active support, but he didn't get in the way. And I knew at that time, this was when it was changing from an NDP, because it was December 2000. It was changing from an NDP to a Liberal government. We were all pretty sure that's how it would play out. And the Liberals on that platform were saying business-based, business-based. And so I said, you know what, we would have to do these types of things to the organization. We would be reducing the size of the organization. We're going to get this place in financially better shape. The capital levels are really low in this company. We need to build that up. As a matter of fact, the capital levels were so low that if we were in private industry, we'd have been shut down many times over. So I said, I want to get this place back to a financial strength, financial health. And he said, okay. So with that, I took on this role, and really, there was a number of executives that changed up at the time. Had a heck of a lot of fun with this. It was tough. We reduced our costs by 25%. We reduced our staffing numbers by 20%. It was a voluntary leave program, though. So, I mean, and there were people ready for retirement, et cetera. They left. The capital grew from $269 million. We're over $3 billion today. We are in line with industry today. We have our investment portfolio of about $13.5 billion. So we have a huge responsibility over the money that we collect in from our policyholders to invest and manage that well. We brought in corporate risk management. We didn't have that in the company before. So we now have enterprise risk management running throughout the company. We have it in our projects and in things that we do, business decisions. I actually introduced what's called business intelligence. You might know it more as business analytics. So really what we do is really try and use the data. And we have now treated our data as an asset, which you never had before. We have data stewards. We have a data governance council that I started up. And started up, I put all the executive on it. And matter of fact, most of them are still on it today because it was something nobody understood or knew. They didn't know what it meant to handle data and do that. So we're now amalgamating this messy, all these databases we have around the company into an enterprise data warehouse, which of course we should have done a long time ago, but didn't have the money to do. So we're really progressing as a company. And you might say, well, some of those things aren't new, Geri. Well, they're not new, but they're new to ICBC. And we're going through a huge transformational change as well. I'll talk about that in a minute. And I worked on bringing legislation with government because in this period of time in 2003, we came half of our business, about half, went under the BC Utilities Commission regulation. So that whole regulatory framework had to be set up for us. And we built some capital frameworks and stuff like that with government. So a lot of fascinating, challenging, really mind-stimulating work that's gone on. And so I have been in this job for 13 years. Now here's the interesting thing. In my first 13 years with the company, I had 4 bosses. In this past 13 years with the company, I've had 8. Okay? So what does that mean? And I am the longest standing executive there, but I think part of what it means is you need to be flexible when you're working with people. I think that's one of the things that has helped me in being able to stay in this position. Flexible does not mean caving in. It does not mean because your CEO pushes you this way, you go whatever you want. It does not mean that. People know my boundaries. People know the discipline and the professional standards that I work within. And every CEO, I have that discussion with them that, you know what, I get, everybody likes good news, everybody likes this, that. Here is where I work, and these are the ways that I work. So I'm very, very clear with everybody that I work with. But I am flexible in my style. And to do that, you have to be able to listen and understand other people's styles. So I think that has probably helped me more than anything. I was also interim president for a period of time. Our CEO left, and unfortunately we were going through an investigation that got played out in the media. It was a really tough time for the organization, and some of my colleagues would have been here through that time as well. So I had to lead through that time, which was probably one of the most challenging things I ever did, because it was a very emotional time for me and for some of the others in the organization. There was a very small group of about 6 people that had done some things in the organization that really cost us reputationally. The dollars were small, so it was probably a few million at the end of the day what it cost us. We're revenue, we bring in $4 billion, so it was not significant in the scheme of the size of this company, but it really hit us reputationally. So I had to lead through that. We also, in that time frame in the 7 months, brought in the first supplier management metrics. So we actually measured our material damage suppliers and brought in metrics, and we drove that down to an individual shop level. Now, what does that do? It means that we can measure performance and they know how they're performing. You might say, well, doesn't everybody do that? ICBC didn't do that. Basically, because we were in a province where at one point it was you gave business to BC first. Right? That was a policy that we had back in the old days. And so some of our suppliers had a little bit, I think it's almost of, you owe it to us to keep us whole. So if business is going down, and we have some sorts, we have these direct discussions with, well, things aren't going so good, so we need a rate increase because otherwise that's not keeping us whole. And we are trying to say, but this costs our policyholders. Our job is to try and get the costs of the system down. So this is where we had to kind of get into the metrics and get discussion around that. Through this time, we also went to the board and proposed, because we built up the capital now, a $400 million transformational project. We're in about year 4 of that, which is a really, really interesting project. We're changing all of those 1973, 74 systems up, changing our processes. So major transformation. And I had an opportunity to work with some ministers and more closely with government. So another rewarding experience. But the observation 5 is your effectiveness to take on these types of roles is largely dependent on how you're viewed inside and outside the organization. If your reputation isn't in good standing, I don't think you can do these things effectively. So your reputation, I always say, is built on what you do, not necessarily what you say. They should be in alignment, but just saying it isn't enough. And it takes time to build, and it's that quick to ruin. So be conscious of what you're doing. All right, I'm going to move on. How am I doing for time? Am I running out of time? Doing good? All right, so planning your career. All right, culture is important, and you won't understand this till you get into a company and you feel the culture. But if you feel there's a real big rub, I say walk away from it, because the values of a company, it's really important you align with those values. If you don't, you're not in sync with the organization. So some organizations have a much more aggressive culture. Some are much more collaborative. You'll figure that out once you're in there. You can also ask people before you're there. So find a company with a good cultural fit. I think that's, at the end of the day, the work's interesting, all that stuff, the challenges, all that. Also find a company with a good culture fit. You'll find it a lot more pleasant to work in there. Okay, so here's where we talk about you. So when you're in a company, the question I always look for, and this is where I look for, who are the leaders in the company? Do they think and act corporately, or do they think and act for themselves? Are they worried about their career and that's why they do the moves? Or are they worried about doing the right thing for our customers? Are you using the right language? Language is an indicator of how you're thinking. Do your behaviors and actions align? And do your decisions, the way you make decisions, does it align with what you're saying? Okay? And it becomes evident to those that are watching you when you get into those management roles. It's evident to me as I look at people that operate within the areas that I work with. So personal leadership is about being genuine and much more deliberate. Right? Much more deliberate about how you show up. And I think it's hard to do. It's a discipline. So you can enhance your leadership if you're conscious of how you show up every day. You honestly can assess yourself today. So I'm going to ask you to take a risk today. Be honest in this exercise I'm going to get you to do. And if we all acknowledge there's room to grow, not one of us is perfect. I screw up every day. But hopefully the way I handle that, or the way I deal with others, that I don't necessarily blame others, that I take accountability for when I do make mistakes, hopefully those sorts of things are where you're going to grow. So it's being much more aware of where you need to be conscious of. I know where my faults are. People have told me where my faults are. And that's okay. I work at that every day. And it's when things are just kind of humming along, I can manage that. When things heat up and the crisis hits or the stress, whatever, I have to work at it. And I am not perfect. That's where I say I can muck up. Because your natural tendencies come out in those times. I want you to do this on your phone, whatever you've got. You got a piece of paper, if you got a pen. I want you to draw this matrix up. Okay? I was told you actually don't need pencil and paper. I was told that you guys all have electronic devices that you can just, you don't have to actually draw this up. You just need to be able to put in spots here. Do something on your technology that'll look something like that. I'll give you just a minute. Just even if you have blank space and you can write things in columns, it's really just being able to write 3 columns of things, okay? All right. So we about ready? Good? All right. I need my glasses for this part. Okay. Say these words. Read those words. All right. So as I said, most of us will behave in a very acceptable way most days. Okay? However, I want you to answer, and I want you to go your column 2, so that middle column, and you're going to put a word or you're going to put a phrase in there to complete this sentence. Okay? Column 2, top box. When I'm in a classroom or I'm working on a project and I have a strong view and I know I'm right, but I can't convince the rest of the people or I can't convince someone in the room, I may appear what? Or I behave. Now, do you talk more loudly? Do you go back over your arguments? Do you disengage? What do you do? When you're in that situation in a classroom and you feel very strongly about something, because you're pretty sure you're right. Now, you might even know you're right, but you can't convince everybody of that situation or your point of view. How do you behave? Put a couple words in there. Okay? All right. Now we're in column 2. We're in the middle box. This is right below it. When I'm under extreme stress, I tend to, what do you do when you're under extreme stress? Do you lose patience? That's me. I lose patience. It's the first thing that goes for me is patience. Do you hide? What do you do when you're under extreme stress? What's that behavior look like? Okay? Column 2, last box. When I'm receiving negative feedback or I'm being criticized, my first reaction is what? Are you defensive? Do you go silent because you're hurt? Do you fire something back at the other person? What do you do when you receive negative feedback or you're being criticized? All right? So you've got kind of 3 phrases of words or whatever. I want you to jump to column 3. All right? Top box in column 3. When I'm in a classroom, I'm working on a team project, and I have a strong view, and I can't convince the rest of the people of my view, or my colleagues, or my professor, or whoever it is, right? They would say that so now it's from their perspective. How would they say you behave? How would the other members of your team say you behave? All right? Okay, we're in column 3. Now we're in the middle box. My friends or other students, my family, my instructors, they know I'm under stress because I tend to. What do they observe about you when you're under stress? If you are your friends, your colleagues, students, your family, how do they know you're under stress? They would say that I tend to, do I slam the door? Do I get that leg shaking? Do I drum my fingers? What do they see in your behaviors that they know you're under stress? What do they observe about you? Okay. And the last exercise is in column 3, the bottom. When I'm receiving negative feedback or being criticized, other people would say, I tend to, what? How do they see you? Remember, you're being honest because you're just doing this for yourself, right? All right. Now, what I find when I do this, and I mean, you can do, I mean, it's about self-reflection. And I don't think we do it very often. What I want you to look is, I want you to look between the 2 columns. Are the words exactly the same between the 2 columns? Because the first one is how you think you're coming across or what you tend to do. The second column is what you think, how you come across. The third column is how others see you. And if you're being honest with yourself, a lot of people would say they're not exactly the same for those types of situations. Has anybody here got things exactly the same? Okay? So what you need to do, here's what I'm going to suggest. I'm going to give you in the first column, you might want to write these things down. The first column in the first box, why don't you just write down something like, so can't convince someone of my point of view or disagrees with me, something like that, just so you remember that that's what that first, right? So in the first row, in the first column. The second one is really about stress, right? And the third one I was talking about really negative feedback. But I mean, you can do this with anything. You can say, all right, when I make a mistake, here's how I think I behave. Would your family say, if you make a mistake, you behave in the same way? Like, are you guys, is it aligned? It isn't in mine. I'll be honest, it isn't in mine. I think I'm very graceful under pressure, but others do not think so. So that's okay. That's good reflection, right? I can admit it, so now I know. And when you know, you can deal with it. So the reason I go through this exercise, it's about being very self-aware, that others see you and you think you're doing something or you may behave, but have you really thought and can you change the way you behave? So a lot about really good leaders is they actually have some emotional control in handling through these difficult situations. The good thing is you're generally not under them all the time. But I can tell you we're in this major transformational project right now and we're starting to see these things. So when you go through a big change like this, it's hard. Things get tough, things go wrong, and people get really tired. And we're starting to see these behaviors come out. And so the executive got together and went, wait. Nobody's blaming anybody. Things have gone wrong, and that's okay. You know what? We want the energy focused on how do we fix it. We don't want the energy focused on how you're going to make sure your team isn't wearing it. Because frankly, it doesn't matter. It's off the rails, and we need to get it back on the rails. And that's where we want the effort. And it's that sort of behavior and leadership you need to demonstrate. But you need to be demonstrating it yourself, right? Because if you go around and do the blame game, I call it, or you go around not taking accountability for things that go wrong, others are watching you. And I think that's where, if you're a true leader, it shows up. It's when the things get tough. So I do that exercise self-reflection. Now here's what I ask you to do. It is for yourself. You don't have to do anything with it. Or you can take it to someone you really trust. You can take it to a friend, a girlfriend, boyfriend, or someone that really knows you well and say, how did I do on this? How do you think I show up in these situations? And see if you get the same answer. All right. So knowing yourself, personal leadership starts from day one. Others are viewing you, and they're building your reputation and your view of you. All right? So observation number 7, be deliberate so you can show great personal leadership every day. And find mechanisms out there of people that will give you feedback, call you on it, help you correct. So if you say, I know I tend to be impatient when I get under stress, and I have given my team permission, and they use it to say, it's showing again, or you're under stress, aren't you? It's obvious. You know, it's a reminder. It's a way of helping you cope through those times, right? So it takes guts to ask for that feedback, but it also takes guts for the person to give the feedback. So there has to be that ultimate trust. But if you have it, it's a way you can improve and start to modify. So those are the 7 observations. I'm about done. I've used up a lot of time. I've talked more than I thought I would, which I should have known that about myself. These are just some of my observations. I've really enjoyed sharing it with you. I hope I've given you something maybe to think about in the future. And thank you very much for being an attentive audience.